The air in the Sinking Spring Farm, Kentucky, on February 12, 1809, was thick with the chill of winter and the raw scent of freshly split timber. Inside a one-room log cabin, barely more than a hovel, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, a woman of quiet strength and deep, abiding faith, brought forth her second child into a world utterly devoid of privilege. They named him Abraham. This was not the genteel South of grand plantations, but the rugged frontier, a place where survival was a daily struggle against untamed nature, relentless disease, and the constant nagging threat of poverty. The Lincolns were poor white trash in the eyes of their wealthier neighbors, dirt farmers, scraping by, moving from one unforgiving patch of land to another. Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father, was a carpenter and farmer, an honest but restless man, perpetually seeking a better foothold for his family, only to be frustrated by bad land titles and economic misfortune. Young Abe's earliest memories would have been of hardship, the biting cold seeping through the chinks in the cabin walls, the monotonous taste of cornmeal, the ceaseless labor. There were no schools in this wilderness, no libraries, no cultured drawing rooms. Learning was practical: how to swing an axe, how to clear land, how to hunt small game, how to build shelter. His mother, Nancy, however, possessed a spark of literacy and a profound respect for books. It was from her that Abe first heard stories from the Bible, tales of justice and struggle that resonated deeply within his impressionable mind. She cultivated in him a nascent love for words, a desire to understand the great narratives of humanity, even as the axe handle hardened his hands. The defining characteristic of this frontier existence was its brutality. Life was short, and death was an ever-present companion. Disease, accidents, and the unforgiving elements claimed lives with shocking regularity. This would not be a mere backdrop to Lincoln's youth. It would be a crucible that forged an empathy rarely seen in political leaders. The frontier taught him self-reliance, observation, and a stark understanding of the human condition, stripped bare of pretense. These lessons learned in the unforgiving embrace of the Kentucky woods would one day guide a nation through its darkest hour. In 1816, driven by land disputes and a moral aversion to the institution of slavery, Kentucky was a slave state, Thomas Lincoln moved his family north.
Life in Indiana was ceaseless labor. Lincoln's towering frame, which would eventually reach 6 feet 4 inches, was not a gift of genetics alone. It was forged by endless hours of swinging an axe, splitting rails, plowing fields, and lifting heavy loads. He was immensely strong, earning him the nickname the Railsplitter decades later, a moniker that would propel him to the presidency. But even amidst the backbreaking work, his mind was always elsewhere. Abe devoured every book he could lay his hands on. There were few books on the frontier, so he walked miles to borrow a copy of Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, Pilgrim's Progress, and crucially, a biography of George Washington. He would read by the flickering light of the fire, by candlelight, or even by moonlight, often reading until the late hours, much to his father's annoyance. Thomas Lincoln saw no practical use for book learning when there were fields to be cleared and logs to be split. This voracious reading was not passive. Abe didn't just read the words, he mastered them. He would often commit entire passages to memory, then recite them aloud, mimicking the speeches and narratives he encountered. He would walk through the woods, rehearsing arguments and speeches, honing his ability to articulate complex ideas with clarity and precision. He was teaching himself rhetoric, logic, and the art of persuasion long before he ever saw a courtroom or a political debate. This self-education, combined with his natural storytelling ability, he was a master of frontier anecdotes and humor, a coping mechanism for his melancholic temperament, made him a popular figure despite his reserved nature. He would gather the local folks and regale them with stories, injecting humor and wisdom into their hard lives. These informal lectures were his first foray into public speaking, developing a voice that would eventually captivate a nation. His growing intellect, however, created a chasm between him and his father. Thomas Lincoln saw his son's bookishness as laziness, a shirking of physical duties. This tension was a persistent, unspoken burden. Abraham loved his stepmother deeply, but his relationship with his father remained strained, a source of quiet sorrow. He understood the hard life his father had led, but he also yearned for a different kind of life, one that honored the power of the mind as much as the strength of the arm.
Abraham Lincoln settled in the small village of New Salem, Illinois in 1831, a place that was bustling but still raw, perched on a bluff overlooking the Sangamon River. He arrived with nothing but the clothes on his back, a formidable reputation for strength, and an insatiable desire to climb the social ladder through his wits. His first jobs were a chaotic mix that defined his lack of traditional direction, but showcased his deep engagement with people. He started as a flatboat pilot, then worked as a clerk in Denton Alfoot's General Store. The store failed, and Lincoln shifted to the lowest rung of the political ladder. He was appointed postmaster and later deputy surveyor. The postmaster role, while seemingly mundane, was crucial. New Salem received too little mail to warrant a daily trip, so Lincoln often carried the letters in his hat, delivering them personally when he met the recipients. This placed him at the heart of the community's information network. He read every newspaper, every political pamphlet, and every letter he handled, absorbing the currents of the nation while earning the trust of his neighbors. His honesty was impeccable. He was so scrupulous that years later, when he closed the post office account, he had exactly $17 remaining, which he promptly returned to the government, a story that cemented his moniker, Honest Abe. Lincoln was an instant success socially. He was not only a gifted storyteller, effortlessly weaving frontier humor and shrewd observations, but he was also a legendary sportsman. At 6 feet 4 inches, lean but powerfully muscled, he was the champion wrestler of the area. His famous impromptu match with Jack Armstrong, the leader of the local gang known as the Clary's Grove Boys, ended in a draw, earning him the immediate respect and loyalty of the wildest men in the county, a crucial political asset in the rough-and-tumble Illinois of the 1830s. His ambition, however, was already focused on politics. He threw his hat into the ring for the Illinois General Assembly in 1832. His platform was simple, advocating for internal improvements, roads, bridges, river navigation, and better public education. He spoke plainly, directly, and without the flowery, exaggerated rhetoric favored by his contemporaries. He lost. It was a crushing defeat for the ambitious young man. He failed to win one of the 2 seats, though he overwhelmingly won the vote in his local New Salem precinct. The defeat, however, taught him the harsh reality of electoral politics. Local popularity wasn't enough. He needed a broader organization and better financing. He retreated, borrowed books on law, and began the relentless self-directed study that would transform him from a postmaster into a lawyer. He tried again in 1834, applying the lessons of his first failure, and this time he won. At 25, Abraham Lincoln, the Railsplitter, was a state legislator, but the victory was immediately overshadowed by profound personal turmoil. Among the families who frequented the general store and the post office was the family of James Rutledge, the proprietor of the local tavern and inn. Lincoln became close with their daughter, Ann Rutledge.
The move to Springfield instantly elevated his status. He was now operating among the state's political elite. As a lawyer, Lincoln quickly became known for 2 things: his honesty and his incredible clarity of thought. He wouldn't take a case he believed was unjust, earning him the nickname Honest Abe, not just in politics, but in the courtroom. When he did take a case, he didn't dazzle juries with legal jargon. He used simple, clear language, drawing analogies from frontier life that everyone understood, appealing to common sense and basic morality. His method was to strip the complex legal issue down to its moral core. But the true making of Lincoln the lawyer and the politician happened on the 8th Judicial Circuit. For 3 months, twice a year, Lincoln rode the circuit, traveling hundreds of miles on horseback across central Illinois with judges and other lawyers. They stayed in crude inns, sharing beds and meals, and holding court in makeshift anews. This circuit riding was Lincoln's graduate school. He learned the local politics of dozens of counties, cultivating a network of friends and supporters that would become his political machine. More importantly, the circuit taught him to read people instantly. Sharing cramped quarters with judges, farmers, criminals, and fellow attorneys, he honed his listening skills and his ability to tell the right story at the right time to disarm conflict or illustrate a point. The years from 1837 to 1849 were the most financially successful of Lincoln's private life. He became one of the most respected lawyers in the state, eventually handling cases that involved major railroads and corporations. Yet, through all the legal success and political maneuvering in the state assembly, where he served until 1841, he remained lonely, driven, and profoundly melancholic. He often confided to friends that he felt he would rather be dead than alive. He needed an anchor, a partner who could match his ambition and manage the chaos of his inner life. Lincoln's search for a partner was disastrous, marked by an aborted engagement to Mary Owens and a period of profound self-doubt. That changed when he met Mary Todd in Springfield. Mary Todd was everything Lincoln was not. She came from Kentucky aristocracy, educated, witty, fashionable, and ferociously ambitious. She had been raised in the wealthy slaveholding society of Lexington, Kentucky, but possessed a keen intellectual interest in politics and a desire to marry a man who would become president.
The year 1858 marked the climax of Lincoln's political resurrection, the race for the U.S. Senate against his longtime rival, Stephen A. Douglas. The contest consisted of 7 massive, direct debates across Illinois, drawing thousands of spectators and media coverage that captivated the entire nation. This was more than a local election. It was a duel for the philosophical soul of America. Douglas, the reigning champion, was everything Lincoln was not. Short, powerfully built, impeccably dressed, and known for his booming voice and aggressive, often demagogic oratory. Lincoln was tall, awkward, dressed in ill-fitting suits, and spoke with a high-pitched, almost thin voice. Yet Lincoln consistently outmatched Douglas in logic and moral depth. Douglas hammered home the principle of popular sovereignty and accused Lincoln of being a dangerous abolitionist bent on racial equality, a charge that would have alienated much of the Illinois electorate. Lincoln, in turn, refused to concede the moral high ground. He clarified his position. He did not believe in full political or social equality between the races, but he fiercely maintained that the Declaration of Independence meant that black men were entitled to the inalienable right to eat the bread they earned with their own hands. He argued that allowing slavery to expand eroded the moral foundation of American republicanism itself. The key moment came during the second debate in Freeport. Lincoln, through shrewd political strategy, cornered Douglas by forcing him to answer a critical question. Could the people of a territory lawfully exclude slavery prior to the formation of a state constitution, despite the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which stated that Congress could not exclude slavery from the territories? Douglas, desperate to hold on to the support of his Illinois base, which was against slavery expansion, answered in the affirmative. Yes, he argued, the people could exclude slavery simply by failing to pass local police regulations protecting it. This became known as the Freeport Doctrine. It was a brilliant strategic trap. While the answer pleased the Northern Democrats, it utterly alienated the Southern Democrats, who felt Douglas was betraying their cause and defying the Dred Scott ruling.
Lincoln lost the Senate race. Senators were then chosen by the state legislature, which narrowly favored the Democrats, but he won the war. The Freeport Doctrine drove a permanent wedge into the Democratic Party, making Douglas unacceptable to the South and ensuring that when Lincoln ran for president 2 years later, his main opposition would be fatally divided. The debates elevated Lincoln from a regional lawyer to a national political figure whose clear, eloquent moral voice was now heard across the land. The national recognition Lincoln gained from the debates laid the groundwork for his astonishing run for the presidency. The final leap from obscurity to national prominence came in February 1860 with an invitation to speak in New York City.